Okay, great. I see the recording. Good. So good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Baldy. I am a regular person parent who has been in this battle with everyone since 2015. And I wanted to get online and interview Christina Hildebrand because I think we need to continue to share information. In my regular life, I'm a regular business owner. I'm not a full-time activist. And so I know many of us in the struggle are in that same boat, and we really need to pinpoint leaders that can help channel our energy and much of the energy that's been harnessed in this particular fight. So I decided to encourage Christina to do more public video sharing of what she knows. So that today we're going to be interviewing her. So Christina, tell me a little bit about you. You mentioned you'd got into this struggle 5 years ago as well. So I'm curious what brought you in and what you're doing now. I know you're a voice for choice, but go ahead and send us off with that.
Yeah, sure. So I did get into this in during SB277 in 2015. And I had a little kid and two little kids at that point. And I initially was just like, I'm going to be one of the people that's up in the Capitol, and, I'll go to every rally, but I really don't want to take a leadership role. That wasn't in my thought process at all. And I went up during the second hearing, the education hearing, and it was the hearing where we all thought we were going to kill this bill, and we knew we didn't have the votes. And, there were more than 1,000 people there. And when the chairperson looked at Senator Pan and said, "You don't have the votes today, would you like an extra week to get the questions answered so that you have the votes?" And he looked at his lobbyist and he comes back and he said, "Yes." I was just like, we don't have any understanding of how this building works. We just, we think we can come up here and that our voices will be heard and that people will be, that the legislature will hear us and vote with us. And I realized at that point that we needed to do something differently, and that, I as an activist needed to know more about how that building worked. And as I talked to different people, and at that time there were many bills across every state, and I was talking to people in Oregon, in Washington, who had killed their bills, in Illinois, where they had basically they lost their personal belief exemption, but they kept their religious exemption. And every one of the people that I talked to said, you need a lobbyist. And this came from people that I also talked to, seasoned people that had been in health freedom activism for 20, 30 years. And they said, you're not going to change anything unless you have a lobbyist. And so at that point, I was just like, okay, what's a lobbyist? What do they do? I think, all I knew about lobbyists were they were bottom of the barrel. You paid them to do your dirty work in the Capitol. And I didn't want to be a part of that. Right. What I realized was that that's the way business is done in that building. And, the lobbyists have the relationships. They're the ones that can get into meetings. They're the ones that get into meetings on other topics and bring in your topic. And so we then, I looked at it. I was like, how do I hire a lobbyist? And you had to create a 501c4. You can do it individually, but I didn't want to do it individually. I wanted to do it as an organization. And so we hired Roxanne Gould as it went into the assembly side. And realistically, I think it was too little too late, although having been through this fight, I'm not sure it was too little too late. I think we just were fighting a beast that we had no control over. Mm-hmm. I think and I don't think Pan was quite as arrogant that year as he was this year. But we hired a lobbyist. We got definitely into more legislative offices, but I think she said, this is unprecedented. I have never been treated like this on a bill. I've been doing this work for 20 years and I have never been, shunned to the lowest person on the totem pole. I usually can get meetings with legislators, no problem. She said, this is just, it's unheard of what's going on in the Capitol.
So this was 277 still?
This was 277 still. And we then, after 277 passed, we worked on SB714, which was the child care workers bill. And we actually got a lot of amendments on that. It was the full adult schedule it started off. And that was a completely different experience. We got into, I mean, I sat at tables with legislators, and I was just like, wow, this is how it really works. And so what I would say is anybody that's been in the fight with SB277 and 726 and 714 now, those bills are not typical of how the legislature works. And basically, our goal after 277 and after 2015 was to stay active in the Capitol and stay active legislatively. And so we worked 2017, 16, 17, and 18. We basically looked at what bills there were we could support, and we could actively create legislative relationships. And so we supported a lot of legislation in those years. In the last 2 years, in 2017 and 18, we what's called shopped bill ideas. And so in December and January, mostly January, all the legislatures are putting together their bill packages. They get to have either 30 or 40, depending on what house they're in, bills that they bring forward that year. And in doing so, they reach out, or organizations reach out to them and say, we've got this bill idea. Would you like to author this bill idea? And so we've been doing that with an organization called Educate Advocate. They're a special needs organization. And our purpose is really, when we shop bills, to be educational. So why would you want a bill on titer testing? That was one of our ideas that we were shopping. And it's really to, part of our process is, so you can sit down with the legislative staffers and say, this is what titer testing is. We knew that bill wouldn't get picked up last year, but it nearly did. But at the same time, we wanted to educate everyone on what titer testing was.
So you're saying that you come together with a bill.
Yeah.
You join forces with another organization. You put together an idea for a bill. It's like a memo. Or you write
we do it different ways. We select, so we had probably 15 bills every year in the last 2 years that we were what's called shopping. About 5 of them were special needs bills, because that's what Educate Advocate does. And we knew we were more likely to get a special needs bill picked up. It wouldn't be under a Voice for Choice advocacy, but we knew, like, our 2 groups, our goal for 2018 was to have a bill go through the legislature, and Educate Advocate did with SB605, which allows for communication devices for special needs kids, for them to keep them over the summer and over vacation. And they got it unanimously passed. It was signed by the governor last week. Yeah. So that was our goal. But our goal in the 15 bills is really a Voice for Choice advocacy, is to go in there, show that we're a reputable organization, that we have good ideas. But we knew that it would be very hard for any of our bills to get picked up. Having said that, there were a few, like there was an organic farm to school bill this year that was introduced, that was one of our ideas. We weren't the sponsor that brought it forward in the end, but we definitely supported it. So some of our ideas have made it into bills. We just haven't been the ones that have brought it forward. It's because multiple organizations have brought forward the same idea, and they've gone with that idea. So
that's interesting. What you're saying is that it takes time to establish credibility amongst the legislatures.
Absolutely.
As a 501c4 is a nonprofit with lobbying political ability.
Correct. Yeah.
That's a legal corporation under California law that is allowed to collect donations but politically lobby, correct?
Correct. And the donations are non-tax. They're not tax
deductible.
It's different from a 501c3. We also have a 501c3, which is, so we have a Voice for Choice
Education
501c3, and then we have a Voice for Choice Advocacy, which is the 501c4. And most of our, in the last 3 years, most of our work has been out of the 501c3, because we do a lot of education. But in 2015 and 2019, most of our work was out of the 501c4.
Okay.
We've been doing a lot of
So within the last 5 years, you managed to set up a 501c3 and a 501c4, shop 15 or so bills through legislation. You got, maybe you didn't get any picked up, but you had some.
So Voice for Choice Advocacy didn't. We had a slightly different goal, because we really use them as education, because you can go to an office and say, we'd like to talk to you about our bill package, And they say absolutely, because they're scrambling for ideas for bills. They're looking at different bills. They're looking at, what do they want to present this year? What's important to their legislature? And so they were open to listening. And so ours were more, as I said, we had one on tighter testing. We did have an organic school bill, school food bill, where we wanted an organic option to be available to kids in school. We had, I'm trying to think what other ones we had. We had one to do with vaccine. We very often put 2 or 3 in with the whole vaccine SB277 and how to make that better. We knew those wouldn't get picked up. Those were truly for education purposes. We had another one that is that.
Can I stop you here and ask you? Did you see 276 coming in that sense, in that we needed some kind of structure in place to assist doctors?
So yes and no.
Okay.
Our goal in 2016 in this long-term goal, and it's still our long-term goal, is to repeal all vaccine mandates. So we would even go as far as saying there should not be the requirement for any medical treatment to go to school. Like, we want to get rid of the vaccine requirement completely. To go to school. That is our ultimate goal. It's a very long-term goal. And so in doing that and knowing that was our goal, that was what prompted us to sort of take this path along. Come October of last year, we knew Senator Pan was very likely to drop a bill this year that had to do with the medical exemptions and the doctors. And that was just from, he was on numerous radio shows, TV. He had written the article in Pediatrics. There was another 2 articles in Pediatric or in different journals that basically it was the writing on the wall. And so we actually, in December, when we were up at the Capitol, we distributed a 40-page packet on doctors' medical exemptions, the witch hunt that had been going on, the behind-the-scenes medical exemption pilot program, to all of the legislatures that were existing and staying on for the next year. And then in January, we came back and gave it to the remaining new legislatures and educated. And it was interesting because the reaction that we got from most, because you have to understand, even if the legislatures come and go, the staffers all stay in the building. And so the reaction we got from staffers was like, oh no, Pan wouldn't bring another vaccine bill. Are you for real? And we're like, okay, if he doesn't, we're absolutely happy that he doesn't, but we're telling you, we see the writing on the wall and it's coming. So we did know about it then, and we. So
there was still, since 277 through A Voice for Choice and Educate Advocate, you were doing education, proposing bill packages. Yeah. And then you saw that he was coming with another bill, and you brought something forward to educate staff on this. Yeah. And would you say that's part of the momentum we got in terms of changing some of these assembly? Because we had 15 abstain.
Yeah, I mean, we did amazing, and I'll get into that. So I think that I think the other piece of it is we learned so much during SB277. And we've learned so much in the years in between. One of the things I'm sure we'll get into is amendments versus not amendments. I don't know if you want me to talk about that now, but one of the experiences that we had in the last 3 years was, I think it was in 2017, there was a home visiting bill, and we do not believe in home visiting. So for those who don't know, home visiting is basically we have a baby, somebody comes into your house, and they preface it with, we're there to help the mothers in this stressful time, to give them access to, diapers and food and services and blah, 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 blah. In our opinion, it's somebody to come in and check up on you and whether you're doing a good enough parenting job. Yeah. And we will never be for home visiting. And so when this home visiting bill came about, we went and we wanted to kill the bill. We went to the author and we said, we just don't believe in this. And he said, you know what? I don't care what you believe in. We're doing this bill. And so then we looked at the bill and we said, okay, what can we do to make it better? And we got an amendment working with the author. We got an amendment that basically was, they had to opt into the program. They had to sign a piece of paper saying they were opting into the program, the home visiting program. And if at any time they wanted to opt out of the program, they could do so, and there would be no ramifications on any of the assistance programs that they were on. And to us, okay, we've got an opt-in and we've got an opt-out you know, in this. And so we never supported the bill, but we took we went to neutral. We took our opposition off because we felt that at least then the parents are informed, and we're about informed choice and transparency. And so that fit with our mission. But what it told us is that, you know, it is very hard to go in and oppose a bill and kill it outright. To go in and try and work with the people and get to the point where you can agree to disagree, but, you know, at least get what you want.
Right. Yeah, I understand that. So that leads me, because here I am, a parent. Yep. I'm not affiliated to anybody. I'm sitting on the outside, screaming and yelling and wanting to make change, and seeing organizations make decisions, like the Voice for Choice made a decision to submit amendments. You mentioned that they were submitted 2 months prior to even the bill signing, or how long had they been circulating by the time?
So we circulated them coming out of the Assembly Health Committee.
Oh.
We had some of them in place before that, but we hadn't made them public.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you introduced them by shopping them out to all the assembly, I'm assuming, at this point, because they were the vote at the time.
Yes. Yeah.
And so how were they, number one, how were they received?
Yeah. So I will say, so we started shopping them probably 2 weeks before the summer, and then we spent the whole summer meeting with all the 80 legislative offices. And I will say, you know, for anybody that's questioning our amendments, please go read them, because our big piece of this was we're living SB276 even before it passed. So our organization over the past, since SB277, past 4 years, has really been in touch with doctors that are writing or doing medical exemption evaluations, and with parents who are looking for doctors. And, you know, we started off probably in 2015 with maybe 150, 200 doctors willing to do medical exemption evaluations, and we are down to a small handful this year. And even if we didn't have SB276, we wouldn't have doctors doing medical exemption evaluations next year, because every one of them, we found out today that there are 69 doctors that have complaints filed against them for medical exemptions in the medical board. And, you know, the thing is even if they aren't found guilty of medical exemption fraud, they'll be found guilty of something, because no doctor keeps good enough notes. You know, I mean, if you look at Dr. Sears, his last probation was basically on note taking. You'll find something in your records that isn't up to snuff. So we felt strongly that we were already living SB276, that, you know, it didn't matter whether SB276 passed or not. And so our amendments, and our key amendments, were 3 amendments. One of them was for the criteria to be expanded from the CDC contraindications and guidelines, even to be expanded beyond SB277, that it specifically said you could use family history, which is in 277, genetics, and relevant research. So basically, many of our specialist doctors are using genetic research from the last, you know, 4 or 5 years that isn't standard of care. It's not, they're specialists in this. It's like a kidney specialist using the latest research. Well, 99.9% of other kidney specialists aren't going to be using it because it's not standard of care, but they're like the innovative ones. And so we really wanted that to be included. So that was an expansion, and it would, again, it would allow more doctors to be writing more, doing more medical exemption evaluations, because they would have the support of it. Like all the doctors, those 200 doctors that are no longer doing medical exemption evaluations, would feel that they would have the support of the legislation. The other piece that we wanted to introduce was in the appeals process, to introduce language from the Knox-Keene Act. Now, the Knox-Keene Act is a healthcare insurance act that basically you're prescribed a medication, the health insurance says we don't cover that medication, and the doctor and the patient can come back and say, oh, but here's all the research that says this patient should be on this. So all of that research is outlined, you know, what can be used in the appeals process. So it's you know, medical compendia, it's peer-reviewed research articles. It's even something like if it has been presented at a medical conference to, I think it's 100 of your peers, then that can be used as backup information. And so we really wanted to put this in place so that doctors know, okay, if I'm using X, Y, and Z research to back up this medical exemption, I've got grounds for that medical exemption to be allowed.
Right.
And then the other one that we went in with was this magic number 5 that Senator Pan just pulled out of his thin air, that, you know, anybody who writes more than 4 medical exemptions, any doctor will trigger review of their medical exemptions. So we were just like, you know, if you have a practice of 7,000 kids, you're going to be over 5 in a heartbeat. If you're an oncologist, you're going to be over 5 in a heartbeat. You know, Pan's response is, well, you know, if you were doing everything right, you wouldn't have a problem with that. And our response is, well, it's similar. One of our doctors said, you know, it's similar to an IRS audit. If you knew that that 5th piece of paper that you were submitting would trigger an audit, even if you thought you did everything right, would you hand in that 5th piece of paper? No.
No way.
And so, you know, that was another one. We wanted either a percentage of your practice, or we wanted the Cures database, which is the opioid prescription database, has, if you write 10 times, if you write more than 10 times the amount of the average prescription writer, then you would be flagged. And that kind of gets at Pan's, you know, we've got these people who are writing ridiculous numbers. Okay, so then go to the ridiculous numbers, not to the number 5. And so those were our main amendments. And we really felt that they would make it stronger for our doctors today that we don't have next year anyway, even if SB276 hadn't passed. And so that's why we were shopping amendments. We also felt that it is, as I said, you know, from our experience, it is much easier to go to a legislative office and say, we have concerns with the bill. And I will say, we started every single meeting with SB276 is not necessary. We feel that SB277 is working. We've had a reduction in exemption rates from 2.7 to 0.9. We don't think it's working. But if you're going to vote yes on this, or if you're considering this, these are our issues with the bill, and here's our solution to it. And so that's where we came from. I'll go back to your question, which I think you asked, which is, you know, how organizations making decisions. I would love it if we could all come together, and, you know, our organization will absolutely go at this again in a month or two, to bring all the organizations together that fought SB276 and bring us all together in a room to have a conversation, because we are planning on bringing legislation forward next year. There are a couple of other organizations that I think will too, and we have to have the support of everything. The worst thing I can think of is that we bring legislation forward and we get slammed more by our side than by the CMA.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's a viable, so I'm all for working with other groups. Having said that, you know, if another group comes to me and says, we're going to kill the bill, that is our belief. We cannot stand amendments. We can't make this any, you know, we cannot stand for amendments. There's not much that our organization can do. You know, I mean, it is, every organization is their own organization. I think we're similar to many, many other movements that have, you know, disparity of thinking. And I think part of that is because we live in California. We have 40 million people in our state. You know, you look at other states, and we have a legislative process that is a professional legislative process, and I'll get into that. But we have 40 million people. You know, New Hampshire has 1.5 million total in their state, and they have representatives that represent, you know, 50,000 people. Our representatives represent 500,000 people in the Assembly and 1 million in the Senate. That's, you know, that doesn't happen in every other state. The other thing in other states is they have a much shorter legislative process. So for example, Texas has, I think it's a 4 or 5 month legislative season every other year. So those legislators for 1.5 years are in their districts working their job. Senator Pan would be a pediatrician, a working pediatrician for 1.5 years and be in the legislature 6 months. 2 things with that. Number one, you're not going to get as many bills passed. In California, we have from January to September every single year. They're working, they're professionals. And you know, every other year between September and December, they're doing election stuff. So, you know, they are professional legislators, whereas in most other states, they're doing their profession and then they're a legislator because they're passionate about their community or their constituency. And so we have a very different picture here in California. You know, I will say, and I'm sure a lot of legislatures will not be happy about this, but I think there are a lot of legislatures that got into this for the want to make a difference, but I think they stay in it because you know, this is better than the job they were doing.
Oh, right. Yeah, because it's a 9-month legislative season, and they can just spend the majority of their year.
Yeah, and they get paid nicely for it. You know, they get paid $140,000-$150,000 a year for it. You know, the Texans and Montana's the best. They have 6 weeks every other year.
Yeah. January to March.
Yeah. But you know, those places, you don't get paid to be a legislator. You get paid at your job, and you're doing the legislative piece of it. You get paid, but you don't get paid that much. So you're paid. You know, your main income comes from your job.
Let me back up a second, because you had one more amendment that I thought was pretty bold.
Okay.
The attached liability.
Yes.
So can you explain that?
And that was one. So as we put our amendment package, there were 17 amendments total. We knew there was no way we were going to get all of them. And so by the end, we kind of withered it down to what's really going to make a difference for our doctors next year. And then we can work out the rest of them. The liability one. So what's interesting, and it will be, I think there will be lawsuits, big time lawsuits on this piece of it. So for those who aren't aware, there is no liability for vaccines for the vaccine manufacturer or for the doctors administrating vaccines because of a 1986 federal act. So that took away that liability. But what happens if you have, your child's doctor has said your child should not be vaccinated, but it's not because of the CDC contraindications or precautions. So it's not for a reason that's good enough. They submit the medical exemption, and it says you're not allowed to. CDPH, the people at the California Public Health Department, say, that's not a good enough reason not to vaccinate. You should be vaccinated. You go through the appeals process, which is 3 physicians. You go through the appeals process. Those 3 physicians also say, yeah, you know what? That's not a good enough reason to have a medical exemption. So you are then a parent who cannot homeschool because you have a full-time job. You may be a single mom. You have a full-time job. You cannot homeschool, and you can't move out of state. There are enough divorced parents in this state that you can move out of state, but your kids aren't coming with you. So that scenario, you decide your kid has to stay in school, so you choose to do the vaccine schedule. In order to get caught up for school, they have to be on this crazy fast catch-up schedule where you're getting 7 vaccinations at a time. Your doctor has said your child is at risk for vaccine injury. I can guarantee you 100% that there is a child that will get vaccine injured between shot number 1 and shot number 21. I think you need 20 vaccines to get it caught up for kindergarten, for school. There will be some kid that gets injured. Who's liable for that kid? It's not the vaccine manufacturer. It's not the doctor that gave the vaccine. And so you're left with the California Public Health Department that told you your child had to be vaccinated to go to school. And I think there are going to be huge lawsuits that
currently they aren't exempt from liability, correct?
No, they're not. Nope.
Okay, so the doctor is, vaccine manufacturers are, but the California Health Department that is sitting in
the decision-making spot
now, put in place by SB276, now they're actually a target for lawsuits.
Absolutely.
Okay. Should we keep that secret?
No, I would love that. I want to, I don't think it's good to keep it secret, because I think they need to understand that by denying and revoking a medical exemption, and by preventing our doctors from doing medical exemption evaluation, and I say our doctors because they are the specialists in vaccine injury. They're the doctors that are doing medical exemption evaluations. They're the oncologists. They're all of those people that are doing this in specialty, and that's why they have hundreds of medical exemptions that they're putting forward. I think that the CDPH should be really scared of whose medical exemption they revoke.
They revoke, right? So if they do revoke one, who gets sued? Is it the agency itself, or would it be the individuals actually revoking the exemption?
So the way it works with SB276 is there is one person at CDPH. We believe that will be Charity Dean, and we can go into that backstory. But we believe it will be Charity Dean or whoever else at CDPH. They will be the one person reviewing the medical exemptions. And your medical exemption gets reviewed either because your doctor's written more than 4 medical exemptions or because your school has fallen below 95% vaccination level. We'll get into that too, about what that means.
Get into that.
Or your school is not reporting. So they look at the medical exemptions, they'll review them. It's up to them to decide which ones they want to go further with review or not. Like that person has the power, the ultimate power. They can say, oh, I like the look of this doctor. He's written 100, but you know, I like the look of him. Not going to go any further with that doctor. But, oh, this doctor, I don't like the look of this doctor. This doctor looks like he's a quack. Like, we're definitely going to review all of his cases.
Okay.
They then get to review. They then get to say, I don't like this doctor's recommendation. If they say, I recommend revoking it, it then goes to the head of the Secretary of HHS, Mark Ghaly, and he gets to weigh in on, yes, it gets revoked, or no, it doesn't get revoked. If it gets revoked, then as a parent, you have 30 days. You can go to the appeals process. You have to file an appeal within 30 days. Your child is allowed to be in school without being further vaccinated while you go through the appeals process. The appeals process is 3 physicians that is supposed to have either pediatric or immunization knowledge. Another amendment we asked for was to have vaccine injury knowledge in there, because vaccinating knowledge is very different from vaccine injury knowledge, but that was another request we had. But those 3 physicians are on a panel. They review, and you can give additional medical information. You can give you more records to back up, and whatever else that they that you think they would be interested in. And then the 3 of them decide whether it gets revoked or whether it stays in place. Okay. And if it gets revoked, you then have to get your child immediately onto the catch-up schedule or remove your child from school.
Okay. So the target of a lawsuit is the agency?
Is the agency.
Okay. So you couldn't name these individual actors who actually denied your exemption?
I need to talk to a lawyer about that. Like our lawsuit, we did name individual people for SB277, and then we were told that we couldn't name them. So in this case, I don't know. Again, I don't know whether the appeals process is. My guess is you can't name the individuals because they've taken this on under the law, so to speak. They haven't taken it on individually as an individual person. But that's something that we need to talk to our lawyers about.
Okay, so just in terms of your amendments, none of them were included.
None of them were included, okay. Correct.
They just were flatly ignored, or? So
from the legislators, I think they were definitely heard. I definitely think they different ones of them sparked interest in different legislatures. I think they definitely helped, and I won't say, we had a huge movement in this. And so when I say we, I very often are talking about everybody that was involved. Right. If you met with your legislator, I'm counting you in this. But yeah. I think we brought up, points of questioning of this bill, and why the number 5, why the CDC contraindications proportions, why the database, why. And even if you were going at it from a kill the bill perspective, those issues came up. And I would say that those issues are what helped the Democrats in the Assembly abstain. So they weren't put in the bill, but I do think they gave food for thought that made people think this bill isn't all it says it is. Mm-hmm. I did see, it was interesting listening to the Senate floor discussion on SB714, because we had people like Galgiani and Senator Stern bring up points like Senator Galgiani brought up the number 5. Like, I feel like we're going to have no doctors writing medical exemptions. Well, that's something that our organization and our movement had been saying. Senator Burns brought up concerns with what he thought was going to happen. And so, and they both voted yes on the bill, but they at least brought up the concerns that we had and we as a greater movement had been giving them. So I think that was a big difference of SB277 versus SB276, is that we actually got heard much better than we did in 277. And it's because we knew we had to get into the legislative process. We hired, Voice for Choice Advocacy hired 3 lobbyists the minute the bill dropped.
Okay.
We got out there, if there's anything you need to do, and many other groups did this as well, if there's anything you need to do, you have to set up meetings with your legislators, you have to get into their offices, you have to meet with them, you have to share your concerns, you have to go to every coffee morning, every public event. And that made a difference in this one.
Right. So when you say, I think the difference from 277 to 276 was that not only did we get heard, our concerns were actually vocalized on the floor, whereas in 277, people wouldn't even stand up and say any.
Right.
Almost no concern. To this time, we had people saying, I rise in opposition. They were saying almost exact word for word concerns that we raised, even if we met with staffers. Those concerns still filtered up to the legislature.
And even people,
language.
And I would say even people, as I said, even people that were in support voiced concerns. They were our bubbling up concerns. So I think that huge difference.
Right.
Huge difference.
So how in order for people to understand that we may not make change overnight, given that pharma's been working on these legislators, you told me CMA has 30 people in that building every day.
30 lobbyists.
So we were up against 30 times, 9 months, which is a lot of days for those CMA lobbyists to be spending with legislators. We came into the fight, 2 to 3 months ago? I don't know the timeline in terms of when the bill dropped. It dropped in October.
It dropped in March, so 6 months.
In March, and so really the fight escalated once it got through appropriations, or that first appropriations and health committee. So you were talking about 2 to 3 months of concentrated effort from groups that spontaneously formed, like PERC. We had people that, just parents like me personally, that got activated and went to my legislator for the very, very first time in my life. I sat down with,
good for you.
Never had done it before. I brought 15 parents with me. So we all did this. And so what I want to know is that was not for naught, right?
It was not for naught.
So how does that actually now roll over into the next step?
Yes.
How do you see that threading into what we have to do next?
So I think we're actually in a forward momentum. I think we kind of exploded because the bill's passed and the governor vetoed it and blah, 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 but it will settle back, it will settle. And I believe we are truly in a forward momentum. The fact that we had 15 Democrats abstain, huge win for us. I mean, it's interesting.